But then one time he called me and told me, we have found the single most difficult thing to find in all the world. And finding really lit me up. And I said, what is it? He said, come to New Jersey and I'll tell you.
Turn it up, swashbucklers! You're listening to Under the Crossbones, episode number 154. My name's Phil Johnson. I'm your host for the show each and every week. Thanks for tuning in and telling your friends and doing all that good stuff that helps me keep the old boat afloat. Episode 154. Fun fact about the number 154. Shakespeare wrote 154 sonnets. On the total flip side, English art punk group Wire has an album named 154, named after the number of gigs they'd done at the time. They'd done 154 gigs. They call the album 154. I maybe should do that with my next album. I will call my album I Completely Lost Track Years Ago. I have no idea how many gigs I've done. It's been lots. My guest on the show today. This is a big fat show today. I'm excited for this show today. You know what I realized? That we just passed the 3-year anniversary mark a couple weeks ago, and didn't even notice, honestly. I'm a look forward type of guy, not a look back type of guy. But 3 years, you've been hanging in there with me, and I appreciate that. And if you're new to the show, I appreciate that too. Plenty back catalog for you to check out to keep busy during your commute or whenever you jog or whenever you like to listen to the show. But this is a guest that I've been working on for quite a while. My guest on the show today is Robert Kurson, author of the book Pirate Hunters and his new book Rocket Men, and a couple others that we'll chat about as well. And if you go back to episodes 20, I think it was 26 and 27, I spoke with one of the characters from Pirate Hunters, John Chatterton. So you might want to, after you listen to this or before you listen to this or whatever, you might want to go back and check out those episodes too, to get sort of both sides of the story of Pirate Hunters. They make a nice little trilogy of episodes there. So Robert Kurson is on the show today, and like I said, I've been working on getting him on for like 2 years now. So I'm very excited to have him on. We had a great talk. You were absolutely going to love it. We're going to talk pirates. We're going to talk shipwreck diving. We're going to talk writing. We're going to talk astronauts, because his new book, Rocket Men, is about the Apollo 8 mission. Really super great book. And if you like explorers, if you like your Cook and your Magellan and your Dampier, these are the guys that were going even further. There was no water, and there was no air, and there was just a moon. So I hope you enjoyed the astronaut talk too, because, man, it's a good one. You're going to dig it. But before we get to that, we're going to have a little shorty. Yeah, I talked to Rich Manic, a.k.a. Captain Festus McBoyle. He wanted to update us with some stuff. They got a new music video coming out. They're doing some really great things. So we're going to have a short chat with Rich coming up here in just a second. I had a great weekend. Did a nice little gig out in Stockton, California. That was quite a bit of fun. Hadn't been on stage in about a week. And so you get that sort of pre-show, oh man, I don't know if I remember how to do this. And then you get up there and you're like, oh, I totally remember how to do this. And it was great. Tried out some new stuff. Fun show. I live for being on stage. I really do enjoy it. It's great. And then Saturday, my girlfriend and I spent the day in Monterey. I had a day off, and so we went to Monterey. And we do a lot of walking in Monterey. We like to walk the trails and things. And so I got my 10,000 steps in for that day. But also ate 30,000 steps worth of bread while we were there. So I don't think my 10,000 steps counts for anything, because of course we got the chowder and a bread bowl, because you can't go without getting the chowder and a bread bowl. And my girlfriend likes the chowder, and boy do I enjoy the bread bowl. Yeah, so we had the chowder, and you scrape out all the inside, and then there's bread shell left, and I'm not throwing that out. No way. I'm Italian. That's going in my face. And so I just folded up the bread shell, kind of like a taco, and just chewed on it for the next 15, 20 minutes. My jaw hurt. That's a good bread. You know it's good bread when your jaw hurts by the end of eating it. So that was fantastic. And then we went to a Swiss bistro for dinner. And we had a fondue dinner. I don't know if you've ever done this before. Fondue hasn't been super popular since the 1970s. But we had a 4-course fondue dinner. The first course was not fondue. It was salad. And salad fondue would be terrible. But then they brought out a Swiss cheese fondue. like 3 cheeses with some bread and some Granny Smith apples and some veggies. That was good. And then we did the meat portion where they bring out the fondue is a broth and you cook your meats in there. And we did that. And then they bring out the best part, dessert fondue, which of course is chocolate. Chocolate with fruits and marshmallows and also. Oh man. So yeah, my 10,000 steps did not count for squat that day. Spent a lot of money, ate a lot of food. And back on the diet this week is back on the diet, yes. Because I got to look good on stage, right? Got to look good for the peeps. Speaking of which, lots of shows coming up. August the 29th, I'll be at Zany's in Nashville, Tennessee. Yeah, with Ian Harris. That's going to be fun. August the 30th through September 2nd, I'll be at Comedy Catch in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And that is with Landry. I'll be featuring for Landry on those shows, who was fantastic. Back here on the West Coast, September the 7th, I'll be headlining at Planet Gemini in Monterey, California. Speaking of Monterey. On September 11th, I will be at Winter's Tavern in Pacifica, California. September 12th, I can't even say this one, Retro Junkie in Walnut Creek, California. That's going to be a fun one. And November the 13th, Hop Dogma Brewery, Half Moon Bay, California. Those are all headline gigs. September the 21st, I'll be at the Pix Theater in Lapeer, Michigan, co-headlining actually with Joe DeVito from New York. That's going to be really great. It's a benefit gig that evening, so we'll raise some money for some kids. We're going to raise money to give them arts programs and things like acting lessons, and that's really great. And then September 22nd, I'll be at the Temple Theater in Saginaw, Michigan. That is a bill chock full of headliners from all over the country. It's going to be great, and I'm hosting that evening because I was sort of a last-minute addition. But that's going to be fun. And then, in theory, after that, I'll be at the World Series of Comedy in Indiana, but we're waiting to hear on that. I should know by next week. Lots of tour dates, though. Edmonton, Canada, Arizona, Nevada, Minnesota, Florida, Oregon, Washington. That's all coming up. You can go to underthecrossbones.com, click on the tour dates button, and that will tell you where I'm going to be. Hopefully, I'm coming near you to tell some jokes and sing some songs. And if I am, come on out and see it. It's a fun, fun show. We are sponsored today by TeePublic. TeePublic is a really great company that works with independent t-shirt artists, and I have hand-curated a selection of over 100 super cool pirate t-shirts for you, right? Because you can't always wear your pirate garb out in, like, regular society without people freaking out sometimes, right? You can't just go to the grocery store, head into the Piggly Wiggly with your sword on and your black powder musket. People tend to look askance at that. So if you want to keep your pirate vibe while you're out with the normies, get yourself a nice pirate t-shirt. And like I said, I got over 100 of them for you. Funny ones, sexy ones, scary ones, all super cool by independent artists who get a piece of the pie when you buy one. I get a piece of the pie when you buy one, and it makes everybody happy. Go to underthecrossbones.com/shirt. That's underthecrossbones.com/shirt to see all the cool pirate t-shirts that I have picked out for you from TeePublic. All right, so let's do this. Let's get into my my short little discussion here with Rich Manic, a.k.a. Festus McBoyle, Captain Festus McBoyle. Got to give him the title, right? So this is short. It's like 5-6 minutes, and we're going to check in with Rich Manic. Here we go.
How have you been keeping?
Doing good, man. Busy. Always too many projects at once, like I'm used to.
Yeah, we all do it to ourselves, don't we? Yeah, but the same way. We're we're still working on the third album, and just finished that second video, and then we're working now animation on the third one.
Nice.
Going to be very Monty Python collage, which is pretty awesome.
Sweet.
Discovered this very clever chap. He's quite well known in this country. One of the top animators who's come on board to for quite considerably less than what he usually does things for. But we said Monty Python, and he saw what we were doing, and he just went, I want a piece of that. So
nice. I've always wanted to do an animated video. I've done like a comic book style one. That was super fun. But the animation always seems prohibitively expensive. I'd love to do one at some point.
Yeah, I mean, he's working in a way where all the images are like copyright free, and
nice.
He's very quick with the drawing side of stuff, and the colouring will be quite minimal. So it'll be quite Monty Pythonish, with the big foot and the head opening and things coming out. So along those sort of lines, which hasn't been done for a while. So
that's very cool. Which song is that going to be for?
It's called Jack Sprat, the Crooked-Eyed Cat. It's a beat poem.
Oh, cool.
It's a real sort of a clever little beat poem about a cat who Yeah, and he'll be an ex-punk rocker cat who's got quite fat and just sits under the washing line snoring, covered in fleas.
Nice. Sounds like something Tim Minchin might have done, except his would have been way more political somehow.
Yeah, no, it should be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Tell me about what you're up to now. You got a new video coming out and a new song. Actually, the song is sort of new. It's the song that we played on your full interview episode, but now there's a music video coming out, right?
There is indeed. Yeah, we got funding from New Zealand On Air, so they funded us for 3 music videos.
Nice.
The first one for Moolah, which obviously came out just recently, and then the next one is called The Little Things. So yeah, we've been doing videos for both of those, and this one's released the 20th of August. So yeah, it's very exciting. It was a massive day. It was basically it was shot in a very muddy, difficult, hilly environment, and we also 3 children alongside us as well in that one. So yeah, it was tricky trying to keep everybody wrangled and under control.
Certainly, yeah. Now, where are those videos going to be available? I imagine YouTube and places like that, but anywhere in particular?
Yeah, the videos will be, well, the video for Little Things and Moolah, actually, they're both on YouTube and on Vimeo, okay. And basically they'll be available on our website, which is obviously captainfestus.com. So you'll be able to check them out on there. Moolah's already up. We've had over 12,000 views now on Moolah, which is pretty amazing.
Nice.
And yeah, so that's quite pleasing. And yeah, Little Things goes live August the 20th. So not long now.
Very cool. And you guys getting out on the road doing some shows and things?
Yeah, we've been working on this new concept, the Family Mashup, which is where we bring rock bands in with vaudeville entertainment and circus acts. Nice. And we also disco with face painting, and then we get the local. I don't know if you have. Do you have the Lions Club over in?
Oh yeah.
America? I don't know if you do.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Well, they do the big sausages, and they've got. It's come a long way. There's now meat, sausages, and vegetarian, so we cater for everybody. And then we had the local school and the local preschool on board, doing cake stalls and sort of savouries and stuff like that. And then the Lions did all the drinks and tea and coffee and water, and so it was a massive day. We had over 550 people crammed into a community centre. And it was all funded by the Faux Local Board, which is so it basically meant that the whole show was free to community. So we're on our 3rd one of those now, and so that's the concept. We're hoping to travel all over the country. Yeah, we've had good success with that, so it's been a lot of fun, but yeah, a lot of work, but that's part of it, you know?
Yeah, certainly. That's cool. I mean, once you get in with some of those community groups like that, like here we've got Lions, we've got Moose Lodges, there's a few different kinds that we have here, and they're not really all that popular here in the U.S. anymore. Their ranks have been shrinking gradually. They keep trying to think of ways to bring those back. Are they still kind of popular there where you are?
We still have the same problem. I mean, it's literally a dying breed. So yeah, they're on the hunt for new blood, so to speak. But it's a very old school sort of club setup, isn't it, really? But
sure.
It's a blimmin' awesome setup, because they do raise a lot of money and they bring a lot of joy to people who need joy in their life, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. My partner was saying the Lions, they do a thing where they sell shows to corporates. The corporates buy the tickets, and the tickets get given to sort of less fortunate people within community, so they get to see a free show, which, you know, for people like that, that's a dream come true, just a bit of fresh air, you know?
Yeah.
So, hopefully this clubs can keep going. Yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah, fantastic, man. That's really great. So hit us with the website one more time, and I'll make sure to get that in the show notes.
Yeah, it's www.captainfestus.com. And look, thanks for all your support too. It's always lovely talking to you.
Yeah, you too, man. Let's talk again soon.
Okay, take care. All the best.
Bye-bye. And there it is. That was my nice little check-in with Rich Manic, a.k.a. Captain Festus McBoyle. If you want to check out all the stuff that they're doing, go to captainfestus.com. Festus is Festus. I will put the new video in the show notes for this episode at underthecrossbones.com/154 so that you can check that out. And if you're enjoying the show, and boy, are you going to enjoy today's show. This is such a good one. Be sure to come over to Facebook and hang out with us a little bit. That's facebook.com/underthecrossbones. On Twitter, we're at undercrossbones. No the in that one. And of course, you can get all the show notes for this episode, like I said, underthecrossbones.com/154. If you would like to help support the show, if you want to help me out, keeping this thing rolling, because honestly, I need to hire some people at this point to help me out. There's a lot of time involved with this, and I need to go hire some audio editors and things like that. So, anything that you would like to do to help support the show would be awesome. You can do that very easily at underthecrossbones.com/support. There's a little PayPal box right there where you can just drop in a one-time donation, whatever you feel is a correct amount for you. That would be awesome. That's easy. Amazon, there's an Amazon banner. If you click that Amazon banner, buy yourself something nice. Whatever you need, maybe a new pair of flip-flops or a hat or a watch. Oh, I got to buy a new watch. My watch broke. Buy whatever you need from Amazon, and Amazon will kick me back a few shekels only when you go through that banner. And what you can do, some people have done this, you click the banner, and then you bookmark that address right when you get to Amazon, and then you can just use that bookmark, and you don't have to come to the site and click through every time. So bookmark that Amazon link, and then you help support the show, and that is super cool of you. If you want to be a sponsor of the show, that's cheap and easy. We can make that happen. Again, go to underthecrossbones.com/support, and we'll get that taken care of. And I do appreciate all the help that you send, because I am going to be hiring on some more help to help me with the show. So we got to get into this with Robert Kurson. So like I said, he's the author of Pirate Hunters, which you have probably read if you're a pirate fan. It's a great story about John Chatterton and John Mattera finding a legit pirate ship. It's a true story. And his new book, Rocket Men. We're also going to talk a little bit about his first book, where they find it's also with John Chatterton, where they find a German submarine off the coast of New Jersey, sunken. Amazing. And he's got some other stuff too that we didn't get a chance to talk to. Some other stuff that he did that we did get a chance. You're going to love this interview. It's so fun. So really great. So let's do it. Let's get into it. I'm going to shut up now. All right, let's get into it. Here's my talk with Robert Kurson. Your new book is Rocket Man, about the Apollo 8 mission. I want to talk about that. Most of my listeners will know you from Pirate Hunters, which came out a couple of years ago. Can you give us a little bit, just a quick synopsis of what that book is about?
Well, that was a story of two scuba divers, recreational scuba divers and deepwater shipwreck divers, who determine at kind of a crossroads in their life to go search for maybe the single hardest thing to find in all the world, which is a golden age pirate ship.
Yeah.
And they have an inkling about which pirate ship this is and who it was commanded by. And to them, John Mattera and John Chatterton, it is one of the great pirate stories and great pirate ships and pirate captains of all time. It's a ship called the Golden Fleece, which was captained by Joseph Bannister. And Chatterton and Mattera are taken with Bannister's story because it's not the typical pirate story, and by the adventures that he had and the way his story came to an end, or the way history thinks it came to an end, at least. And so that's really the story, but it's also a story of what happens to two men who are at a crossroads in their own lives and what they decide to do with life and how to live it when things could go either way.
And that is a central feature in your writing that I've noticed with the two books that I've read so far, is that it's about the people more so than the events. And in fact, when I was talking with John Chatterton on the show, he said that at one point during the research for Shadow Divers, you went to him and Richie Kohler and said, "Oh, you know what, you guys, this is about the people. It's not about the events." And they were like, "Great." And then you said, "Now I need to talk to your ex-wives." And that's when they freaked out.
Right. That's really true. You know, I love a great true story, but the thing I love most of all is the people who are at the foundation of the great true story, because exciting things can happen on the surface, but when they're happening for reasons that are common to all of us, that we all understand instinctively about life and living life, then I think it becomes more interesting by an order of magnitude. So I'm always really looking for interesting people doing interesting things, and often those people are at a crossroads in their lives.
Right. Now, Shadow Diver was your first book, which was also your first book with John Chatterton. How did you come across his story, and how did you guys meet?
Well, that was a very happy accident. You know, the older I get, the more I realize how much luck and accidents have to do with things in life. But that was one night I was here in Chicago at my home, and I got a phone call from a friend who said, "You should turn on PBS Nova. There's a story about these two recreational scuba divers who found a World War II German U-boat sunk in New Jersey waters, and there's 56 dead sailors aboard, and they're trying to solve the mystery. Turn it on." And I thought to myself, boy, I wonder if there's any 3 subjects I'm interested less in than scuba diving, German U-boats, and World War II naval warfare. But I wasn't doing much else at the time, so I flipped it on. And this was a special 2-hour episode of Nova, and it was fantastic. It was really beautifully done and fascinating. And I was completely pulled in, but I kept waiting for them to address the one topic that interested me most. And this goes back to what you and I were discussing a minute ago, which is why would these 2 guys risk so much to identify this lost U-boat? It became clear through the broadcast that there was no Nazi gold on the U-boat. Hitler's remains weren't on the U-boat. No priceless artifacts. It was just a number. It was a mystery that history and the great historians of the world couldn't solve. And it fell to these 2 guys. And people were dying trying to solve this mystery, literally, diving this really dangerous wreck, 230 feet down and 60 miles off the coast of New Jersey. And so I kept waiting for an explanation, and then the credits rolled, and I thought that's one of the best documentaries I've ever seen. But the one question I really want to know about, which is why did these men do what they did, wasn't answered. And so I ran into my office and I looked up John Chatterton's phone number on the internet, and I called him. And even as the credits were rolling, I was talking to him and said, I have a couple questions. And he said, well, didn't you watch the show? And I said, yeah, but they didn't answer them. And he said, well, do you like to grill on the barbecue? And I said, of course, I'm from Chicago. Yeah. Second question was, can you ride a Harley? And, my dad was in the motorcycle paints and lubricants business, so I can ride a Harley.
Okay. And
I told him, and those 2 answers were satisfactory. And 2 days later, I was talking to him and Richie in New Jersey and hearing what I thought was the most fantastic story I'd ever heard in my life. And the parts that really made it incredible were those human elements. Why were these guys risking their lives, the lives of their friends? Their marriages came apart. They lost almost all their money. They went on a 6-year odyssey to solve the mystery. 4 mysteries, really. Which U-boat was this? Who were the 56 dead Germans inside? What was it doing in New Jersey, and how did it meet its end? They risked everything for that and actually solved these mysteries. But the reasons why they undertook this and risked so much were really beyond anything I could have imagined. And that became the foundation for my first book, Shadow Divers.
And were you planning on writing a book, or did you say this needs to be a book?
Well, a lot of times, and I haven't always been a writer, so that was relatively early in my career. I used to be a lawyer before that, believe it or not. But a lot of times when you're a writer, you come across things that seem like really good ideas, or people give you good ideas, and almost always they turn out to be good ideas for a magazine treatment. But to sustain a book over the course of 350 pages, and to make people want to turn the page with every single page, that requires a really exceptional story with multi-layers to it.
Yeah.
So as I arrived in New Jersey, I didn't know. I was pretty sure this would be a great story for a magazine, but within 20 minutes of meeting them, I knew this was a definite book. It was so rich on so many levels that I couldn't believe the luck I had in coming across it.
Yeah, and even just talking to John for an hour, I was like, oh, this dude's got enough stories for more books. Yeah.
He's an amazing guy. He's one of the most amazing people you'll ever meet. And it could not be a nicer guy either, and a funner guy.
Yeah.
But he is dead serious when it comes to the business of diving and also for pursuing life in its most meaningful terms. He's not a person who lives halfway.
Yeah.
And to understand his approach to life is really it's a gift to anybody who gets to share that with him. He really knows how to live as fully and meaningfully as anyone I've ever met.
So you mentioned that you were a lawyer early on. What kind of law were you doing?
Oh, the worst kind. It was big firm real estate and corporate law.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
It was a nightmare from the day I started. I was making really good money after, 7 or more years of being totally broke as a student. First in college and then in law school. So I had about 8 years of total poverty. And then, you came out, and I graduated from Harvard Law School. So I had opportunity to make, really good salary coming out of school and work where I wanted to work. But the work itself was so soul crushing and stultifying that I started to believe that my life was over, basically. And not that I contemplated suicide or anything, but that my emotional life had been deadened already. And I was looking at 50 years of utter boredom and frustration and disinterest. I just could not have cared less about the work or the clients that I was representing. And you don't want a lawyer like that.
Right.
And so I thought, I have to get out of here. I'm going to live a very unhappy life. And the things I was spending my money, I was treating myself to a BMW and a very fancy stereo, and I had a bike with more gears than I would ever use. But it was all meant to anesthetize the pain and to numb my the reality of my situation. And so I figured I got to get out of here. But the problem was I didn't know what else to do, and I didn't know how to do anything else. Mm-hmm. But that hardly mattered after a short time. I just thought I got to get out, or I'm not going to live a happy life, basically.
Right. I have more than a few ex-lawyer friends in the comedy community who went through exactly the same thing, where they're like, this lawyering thing is a drag, and I'm going to go tell jokes for a living, even if I make a fraction of the money that I was making as a lawyer.
Yeah, it's a terrible situation. I went to school with a guy named Greg Giraldo.
Oh, yeah.
He and I were in the very same class at Harvard Law, and he went on to become a very well-known, successful comedian.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was largely for the same reasons. I talked to him. I even wrote about him for Esquire once. And, the story is always the same. It's like if you have an instinct toward creativity or toward a kind of less predictable life, it's very hard to make, decades in a law firm where one of the highest callings is to be cautious and conservative. You want your lawyer to be very cautious and to dot every I and cross every T, but
sure. That's
not what's in the soul of every single person who graduates from law school. A lot of us showed up there without really knowing or understanding what lawyers did. It sounds crazy to say, but when I got to law school, I thought lawyers did what they did on the television program LA Law,
sure.
which was number one in the country at the time. And they had a crazy, exciting, dramatic case every week. And they dated beautiful women, and everything was wrapped up neatly at the end. Well, that's not what it was, but I was very naive, to say the least. And when the reality of it hits you about what law entails, especially if you go into big firm kind of corporate law, then you have to have a reckoning with yourself. And people like Greg and I, chose one way, and it's sometimes scary to do that, but often it feels like you have no choice.
Yeah, certainly. And so what did that transition look like for you? Where did you go? Not knowing how to do anything else, as you said, where did you transition to?
I got very lucky. I sent out resumes to every newspaper within a 100-mile radius of Chicago. And this was in the days when there were tons of newspapers of every size around.
Uh-huh.
And I got only one response, and that was from the sports editor at the Chicago Sun-Times, a gentleman named Bill Adie,
okay,
who said he didn't have a job for me, but he said he just got a letter from another disgruntled lawyer in Florida and thought the two of us could commiserate together. But I wasn't about to let him off the phone. So I begged for a chance to just answer phones in the office. And the one thing he told me when I got there and was ready to answer phones was, sometime someone in the sports department might blow a deadline or come in drunk or something, and we might need you at the last minute and turn to you. And if you do well, we might turn to you again. And that's how that guy over there got to start, and that guy over there got to start. So I just kind of was lying in wait for my opportunity. And that's exactly how it played out. I got a small chance, then a little bit bigger chance, and I ran with it and was so grateful to have it that I did everything that was possible to do there. And that's kind of how my career started.
That's a common theme among the artistic types is be there at the right time, regularly show up and be reliable, and you'll find some opportunities like that. I've had them myself as well. So that's really cool. What was your first sort of big feature article that kind of gave you a name? I
did a lot of work for the Sun-Times, first in sports and then in general features, and became kind of one of the lead feature writers there at the Sun-Times. Then I moved to magazines, and kind of simultaneously I went to work full-time at Chicago Magazine, which is one of the best city magazines in the country. I argue it's the best. And at the same time I started writing for Esquire, and the first major piece that I was recognized for was published in Esquire. It was called My Favorite Teacher, which was about a biology teacher that I had in high school here in a very Tony, rich area of the North Shore in Chicago, which proved to be a very lonely place for a strange, sort of shy, unusual kid like me to exist. Judgments were everywhere. It was a very difficult place to move to. I moved there a few days before school started from a much more normal area that I was more comfortable in, and it was very difficult for me. But there was this one biology teacher who was very kind to outcasts like myself. In fact, he seemed lonely and outcast himself, and he was very kind to those of us who were like him. But it turned out that he did some very, very terrible things, including kidnapping and sexually assaulting and even murdering one high school kid. None from my high school. He had refrained from going after his own students, but that was changing. And so on the 20th anniversary of the crime for which he was arrested and convicted of murder and sentenced to life without parole, I had always been wondering what had happened to him. So the story was a piece about what he had done, why he had done it, and then my going back to find him and to reconcile this kind gentleman with what the terrible things that he had done, and also a kind of a meditation on the place that I had moved to.
Right.
So that was my first story, and that gained me a lot of attention and a literary agent, and that's my career went from there.
I read that story this morning, actually, because I saw it on your website, and it was one of the most uncomfortable things I've ever read in my life, because of the way that you would at the beginning, you kind of detail what he did, or at least you give sort of an overview of what he did. But then there's this long segment of you building up the praises of him taking care of the outcasts, which I had teachers like that too. They're very, very important. And just as you're starting to admire the guy and kind of be on his side, then boom, you go right back into these horrible things that he was doing. And it was very jarring and very, very effective. How many drafts did something like that go through where you got to that kind of structure?
It took about 3 or 4 drafts. And I remember in the first draft or 2, I didn't even include myself in the story. You know, I had an early impression of good writing, that a good writer was like a good baseball umpire, that you don't notice him if he's doing his job right.
Right.
But this was one of those rare stories where I had a very close personal connection to the events and to the people. And so when I decided to put myself into the story, then it really, I think, gained a power that it didn't have previously, because I was like a lot of kids who went to that school and experienced this person and those times. It had a deep effect on me and had never been resolved in my mind. And so I needed answers, and I think a lot of people needed answers, but there was really no way of getting those answers without becoming a part of the story myself. And so once I approached it that way, I think the story became something much different than it had been on the first draft or 2.
Yeah, it was really fascinating, very uncomfortable to read, but they're thoroughly enjoyable as well. Is that an argument that you have to have with yourself, or a decision to be made with each of these projects as to how much you're going to be a part of the story or not? Like when you're dealing with somebody like John Chatterton, how far after the fact were you dealing with those guys? Where did you have to decide whether you were going to be part of the story or not?
Oh, in almost every other instance, I'm not part of the story.
Okay.
The events happened. I wasn't around for them. I didn't participate in them. All I want to do is tell their story effectively. But in a certain way, you bring a lot of yourself to any story you tell, even if you're not featured in it yourself, because you have your own viewpoint and you have your own decisions to make about what's important and what's less important. So every writer is in every story in some way, but in terms of being an actual character in the story or referencing myself, I think that's only happened twice, both times in a magazine story in my whole career.
And the reason I ask that is because the way you write, it seems like you are standing there next to them on the boat, doing the thing. You're very, very present. Less so, I think, in Rocket Men, just because we know that happened in 1968 and, all that kind of stuff. But with the John Chatterton books, there's less of a readily specific time period that's happening in there. And the way that you write it just sounds like you're standing there right next to the guys. Was that a style that kind of came from the article writing, or was it something that developed as you were doing the books?
Well, I think kind of both. As I said before, the thing I'm most interested in is people.
Right.
And so when I do a story, especially a book, I like to spend as much time as humanly possible in person with the subject. So I'll ask to move in with them, to stay with them, or at least to be present with them for days and days, if not weeks on end at a time. Mm-hmm. And so I get to really, really know them. In the case of Chatterton and Kohler and John Mattera later in Pirate Hunters, I was present with some of the best storytellers you'll ever find. And they gave me so many hours. I'm talking about hundreds or thousands of hours with them. That I really felt like I had been to these places with them and had done these things. Add on top of that a lot of the stuff they did, they videotaped.
Uh-huh.
I mean, almost every dive that Chatterton and Kohler made to the U-boat, they had videotaped. And then Chatterton, who was just a brilliant storyteller and describer. By the way, they're two different skills, describing and storytelling.
Sure.
Chatterton and Kohler and Mattera, all a master of both of them. Chatterton took those underwater videotapes and narrated over them to tell me exactly what was going on, exactly what he was thinking, exactly what fear he had lying ahead, everything. So it, short of actually being on the dives with him, it was the next best thing and really gave me a proximity to him and the story that is almost singular in my experience of interviewing people and describing things.
Interesting. Did you physically go to any of the locations at all?
I went on another journey with them on the same dive boat that they used called the Seeker to the same kind of area. It was to actually a sunken destroyer, not the U-boat, but it was the same length of trip, the same kind of difficult ocean. And I got every bit as seasick as they predicted I would on the thing. I was such a lightweight compared to these bruisers who are, used to rough seas and everything. But it did give me an idea for the conditions. And this is a working boat. This was not, a cruise ship by any means. And I saw these guys work so hard diving this sunken ship they took me to. And, they were all business while we got there. And I saw them hook into the wreck. I saw them navigate, bring things up from the wreck. It was just an incredible experience to have, and one that I'll never forget.
Yeah, I'll bet. Does any part of you doing that go, I want to go down there too? Did you think to try it, or did you actually try it?
Well, yeah. And when I started working on the book, I absolutely committed to doing it, to going to the wreck of the U-boat. And those guys shook their head and said, that's insane. And I kind of knew it was insane because 3 people had died diving that wreck. It's extraordinarily dangerous,
right?
For all kinds of reasons, which I describe in the book. But nonetheless, John and Richie told me, well, look, if it's that important to you, we will take you diving. We'll get you gear. We'll plan a dive with you. We'll rehearse together. We'll get you a bunk on the boat and we'll take you down there. And, but you got to understand how dangerous it is. And I told them, I think to really communicate what this story is about, I have to see it myself. I don't think I could do my readers justice unless I go. So they said, well, the one thing you have to do is go get your diving certification to get on the boat. So the one problem is not only do I not dive, I don't know how to swim. But they said, don't worry about it. We don't really swim down there. We're kind of finger crawling along.
Right.
I'd seen the videos by now and they weren't swimming. So I thought I could do it with ease. Well, long story short, when I showed up for scuba class, the first night went great. I knew more about scuba, it seemed, than the instructor. But the next time when we went to the high school swimming pool for our in-water portion, I was pulled out of the water immediately because I could not swim. I was flailing about. And the guy said, you can't swim. What the hell are you doing in scuba class? And I said, I only need to make one dive in my whole life, and then I'm done with scuba forever. And he said, one dive? I said, that's it, one dive. And he said, where are you going? I said, I'm going 60 miles off the New Jersey coast, 230 feet down into a World War II German U-boat. And he said, you're out of the class. And I was heartbroken. And I honestly thought that was the end of the book. And I called John Chatterton from the parking lot, and I was choking back tears because to me, this was the greatest story ever. And I just believed I couldn't tell it if I couldn't go to the boat. And I told Chatterton, and he loved it. He laughed and he said, oh, tell me the part again when he told you you're kicked out. And I said, I'm glad you're laughing, but I think that's the end of the book. But why did you tell me that I could go with you if you knew I couldn't get through the course? And he says, he said, we knew you'd never get out of there. But he said, what we like about you is that you treat your writing the way we treat our diving. This story seems to mean everything to you. And this shipwreck meant everything to us. That's why we like you. So come out with us. We'll take you to a different wreck. We'll show you these videotapes and everything. And I think you can get a really, really good idea without killing yourself. And that's how we did it.
And when you ended up doing a second book with John, when you did Pirate Hunters with him, did you have any trepidation about doing a second book on essentially the same people? There's John Mattera was a different character in the book, but was it just so compelling a story that you felt you had to do it? Was there any idea of maybe I shouldn't do it?
No, there was no hesitation whatsoever. One of the things that I'd always found fascinating about John Chatterton was that he needs to be living life to the fullest, and he does not like to tread water, either, literally or figuratively. But after the U-boat and after he'd gone to Titanic, he went to Titanic in a submersible with Richie Kohler and had done every other challenging wreck. I worried for John about what do you do next after you've done everything? What does a person who needs to move forward do when he's done everything? And he he and I would keep in touch and talk often. But then one time he called me and told me, we have found the single most difficult thing to find in all the world. And finding really lit me up. And I said, what is it? He said, come to New Jersey and I'll tell you. And I went to New Jersey. And there he was with John Mattera, and they told me they had found a Golden Age pirate ship, and not just any Golden Age pirate ship, but maybe one of the greatest, commanded by one of the greatest. And he said, not only did we find it, but we did, next to the impossible, we identified it. And only one Golden Age pirate ship, they told me, had ever been found and positively identified.
Yeah.
And that was the Witta.
Correct.
But after that, and they explained to me the reasons why it's so near impossible to find and identify a pirate ship. Pirate ships are meant to be invisible. That's the entire idea. They are stealth operations. They don't report their crew or their location to any government or Navy, of course. And they are often stolen merchant ships. So it's very difficult, even if you happen to stumble across one, to know it was a pirate ship and certainly to prove it. But here they had gone looking for one. They didn't stumble across it. They went looking. They'd done a lot of historical research, and here they had found one that was a thrilling, not just a thrilling discovery, but a thrilling backstory. And so I thought, who doesn't like pirates? Everybody I grew up with liked pirates,
right?
And they continue to fascinate people to this day. You just look at the Pirates of the Caribbean movies.
Sure.
And I thought, what could be better than writing about the discovery of a great pirate ship and a great pirate, made by two guys who were really kind of at a crossroads in their middle age. What do we do next? And their answer was to really go for it and find something virtually impossible to find.
It was, just a fascinating book. And like I said, it felt like you were really there, experiencing the thing almost firsthand. I could smell the sea salt in the air kind of thing. So that was really great. Now, when you started into the process for Rocket Men, the Apollo 8 mission is not as famous as the other Apollo missions, especially the one that actually landed on the moon, or the one that nearly didn't come back. And what was it about the Apollo 8 mission that you thought hadn't been told about that story yet?
Well, very little had been told about it. There had been a book maybe 30 years ago, and I knew very little about Apollo 8, but I happened to stumble across the Apollo 8 command module. Their capsule is here in Chicago at the Museum of Science and Industry.
Yeah, I've seen it. It's great.
And I was astonished. It's unbelievable. And it's a wondrous thing to behold. It looks like it came from the past and the future all at once. And I read the placard, and it said, this is the command module of Apollo 8, which made mankind's first journey ever to the moon. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. Why don't I know anything about it? I mean, I knew about Apollo 11, like we all do, which made mankind's first landing on the moon. And I knew about Apollo 13, where Tom Hanks portrays Commander Jim Lovell,
right,
who almost doesn't make it back because of an explosion in an oxygen tank near the moon. But I didn't know anything about Apollo 8. But here it said, this is the spacecraft that made man's first journey away from home and man's first arrival at a new world, our most ancient companion, the moon. So I went home and I started to research Apollo 8, and it took me all of 15 or 20 minutes to realize that this was the single greatest space story of them all. And really one of the great human exploration stories of all time. But it wasn't just me who thought so. I started to read and listen to interviews with other astronauts and with people, legends from NASA, and they all spoke about Apollo 8 in a tone that was different than the ones they used to describe their own missions or other missions. It was a tone of reverence. And it went all the way up to Neil Armstrong, who spoke about Apollo 8 differently than at least it seemed to me, than he spoke about Apollo 11. And basically what he and the others were saying was that by the time we went on our missions, so much of what we needed to do was known to be doable. But when Apollo 8 went, nobody knew that any of it could be done. They were the first. They did almost everything, save for landing, for the first time. And they did it on an incredibly compressed schedule. Instead of taking a year to a year and a half, they had only 4 months, 16 weeks to conceive of and prepare for this flight. Unthinkable, given NASA's step-by-step approach and careful approach. It was all rushed. It was all unbelievably courageous. They took risks that are almost inconceivable now when you look back on it. And we could talk about those, but any one of them could have been enough reason not to go. But adding them all together and then doing it on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day at the end of one of the worst years in our country's history, 1968, made it a story like I thought I had never heard in my life before. And when I realized that it had been a very, very long time since anyone had really treated the subject, and that the 50th anniversary, no less, was coming up, I thought, I have to do this no matter what. This is the greatest story I've ever come across.
Nice. Yeah. And I just realized this morning that it was the 50th anniversary of that. And that's really cool. What I found most shocking, I think, about the story is that so little went wrong. Did you, as a writer, looking for conflict in a plot, was that hard to work around, that very few things actually went wrong with the mission?
Well, not at all, because first of all, the risks they took to get there and what they needed to do to get to the launch pad is so exciting that it almost takes your breath away. Just think, I'll give you a couple examples, even before they get to the launch pad. To fly Apollo 8 in this short a time frame, they're going to take this Saturn V rocket, which to this day, believe it or not, think about this, 50 years later, as you and I are speaking today in 2018, the Saturn V remains the most powerful machine ever built. 50 years later, think about that in terms of technology.
Yeah.
But that's the rocket they had to use to get to the moon. But by the time Apollo 8 was ready to go, the Saturn V had only been launched twice ever, both times unmanned in test flights. And the second of those tests had failed spectacularly. Now NASA is talking just a few months later of putting the next Saturn V on the launch pad and not just going into Earth orbit, but going 240,000 miles away to the moon with it, with 3 men aboard who have wives and children. Incredible. But they're also going to go without the Lunar Module. That's the spidery landing craft that astronauts would use on landing missions to shuttle between the orbiting spacecraft and the lunar surface. So going without the Lunar Module meant that the team would be going without a backup engine, because that was the secondary function of the Lunar Module. It served as a backup engine. That meant if anything went wrong at the moon, with the primary engine the astronauts had on board, they could be stranded at the moon, they could crash into the lunar surface, or fly off into eternal solar orbit. That single engine with no redundancy had to work just right, or they were in huge trouble. And that was just the start of the risks they were taking. So just the preparation and the conception of this trip and the push to get it to the launch pad by the end of 1968 to try to keep President Kennedy's promise, and maybe more importantly, to try to beat the Soviets, who looked like they were going to get there first. And that was everything, to get the first men to the moon. It all made for a beautiful buildup. And then during the flight, all kinds of things did start to go wrong. Frank Borman got very sick on the way to the moon, and that almost turned the flight around by itself. And all kinds of other incredible things happened on the journey that were so historic and so important, even some of which changed how the entire world felt about itself. It was a flight unlike any other. And so many dramatic things happened. And yes, they did make it back safely, and the flight went beautifully in the end. Jim Lovell, by the way, made a mistake entering coordinates for stars on the way back that nearly cost the flight its existence.
Yeah, that was amazing.
Yeah, it's a lot of drama. And he told me, he only lives about 20 minutes from me, such a delightful guy. He told me when we were sitting there in his kitchen that what he learned from the mistakes made on Apollo 8 were part of what helped him return Apollo 13 when the time came. So there's all kinds of drama going on Apollo 8 that made it more than dramatic enough. There are so many points in the story that you just find yourself holding your breath, because so it's what they're doing is so important and so historic that and so it really does change our perspective on humanity, what they did.
I was fascinated with the stories of the wives. I don't think anybody realizes what their wives had to go through, with reporters camping out on their lawn and, them constantly being glued to a squawk box in the kitchen where they could actually hear the astronauts. I didn't know any of that. I thought that was really fascinating. I know you spoke with 2 of the wives, right?
Yes, all 3 are living, but Susan Borman, by the time I met her, was in the advanced stages of Alzheimer's, so I couldn't really communicate well with her. But I spoke at length to the other 2, Marilyn Lovell and Valerie Andrews, such delightful ladies. But even more important, it took a very short time for me to realize that the women, these wives, were just as courageous, just as heroic, and just as responsible for the success of the flight of Apollo 8 as their husbands were.
Yeah.
They took amazing stress on their shoulders, internalized it all, raised families without ever letting on to their husbands the kind of stress they were under or the kind of anxieties and fears they may have. And that was especially true of Susan Borman. Susan counted among her best friends a woman named Pat White, who was the wife of Ed White, who was one of 3 astronauts who perished in a launch pad test for Apollo 1 in January of 1967.
Mm-hmm.
It was a tragedy that took the lives of all 3 crewmen of Apollo 1. But it devastated Pat White, as you can imagine, and Susan by proximity. And Susan began to drink a little bit at first and then more, and became increasingly convinced that the space program was not going to end well for Frank. When the flight for Apollo 8 came through, this sudden change of assignments, now they weren't going to go in a low Earth orbital test mission, but going all the way to the moon, and not just around the moon like the Soviets were planning, but in orbit around the moon 10 times, something magnitudes more complex. Susan became convinced with 100% certainty that Frank was going to die on the mission. She was so sure, by the way, that while he orbited the moon, she composed his eulogy. It was just a given that he was going to die. So you can imagine the kind of torment and anxiety she was internalizing, but she never, ever betrayed a moment of that to Frank or to her 2 sons. She believed it was her duty, both to her family and to her country, to make Frank's life as stress-free as possible when he was at home so he could concentrate all his energies on his job. But it was very, very difficult on her, so much so that I think it really caused her to devolve into alcoholism. And Frank never had a clue that it was happening because she just did everything in her power to make everything seem so happy. And then, as you note, during the flight, and even long before the flight, there are oceans of reporters on their front lawns. The wives can't go anywhere without being observed. In fact, they had a contract with Life magazine to allow reporters inside their homes.
Oh, geez.
So they're dealing with a lack of privacy on top of everything else. The entire world is watching these 3 women.
That's amazing. And I think Frank Borman is the one that didn't go up again, right? That was his only flight?
Right. Neither Borman nor Anders went up again.
Oh, okay.
Frank Borman was really had joined NASA for a single purpose, and that was to defeat the Soviet Union in the most important battlefield in the universe, outer space. He truly believed that we were in an existential battle with the Soviet Union and that it needed to be fought in space ultimately, and that by sending the first men to the moon, you could deal a devastating blow to the Soviets in the space race. And he was right about all of that. But he believed that once Apollo 8 made its mission and beat the Soviets to the moon, his work was done, and it didn't seem worth it risking so much, including his family, just to pick up some rocks or to gain, a modicum's more scientific knowledge. He believed that the battle had been won at that point, and that was it for him in the space program. Lovell, of course, continued and became the commander of Apollo 13,
right?
Which is its own incredible, legendary story.
Sure.
But Anders also did not fly on another space mission. But all 3 men went on to have incredibly successful post-NASA careers. And you could not have picked a better crew for mankind's first journey away from home and first arrival at a new world. These guys were phenomenal minds and terrific gentlemen, too. You couldn't meet 3 nicer guys either. They truly did have the right stuff. And NASA got very lucky, in my opinion, having them for this most important of all flights, in my opinion.
You take great pains in the book to place the story of the astronauts against everything else that's happening in 1968 and making a point of showing that that mission really did kind of bring the world back together, if nothing else. But I mean, there was so much happening in 1968. To make a parallel, we're kind of almost there again. 50 years later, we're dealing with the Russians. There's division in the country. There's all sorts of things happening. Was that in your brain at all as you were writing this over the last couple of years? I mean, we weren't quite there yet when you were writing, but did you see any of that coming?
Oh, absolutely. As a resident of Chicago, it's burned into all of our minds what happened at the Democratic National Convention in 1968 and the confrontation between the protesters and the police. It was a terribly ugly situation here. And Sure, there are so many echoes from 1968 up to today. The country again really seems torn against itself. The very fabric of society seems to be ripped in front of our eyes almost every day. Everybody seems set against everybody else, and that's exactly how it was in 1968. I would argue 1968 was much worse even. I think you could make a good argument it was one of the worst years in our country's history.
Certainly.
And maybe the worst, separate from some Civil War years. But you had the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy. We're on our way to 15,000 dead in Vietnam. We have Walter Cronkite, the most trusted man in America, telling us that what our leaders are saying about Vietnam being winnable is not true. Mm-hmm. You have violence in the streets all over the place all year long, including here in Chicago and at Columbia University and many other places, South Carolina. You have racial divide. Everybody seems set against everybody else. And here NASA is planning at the very end of this horrible year to send these 3 brave men on a mission that is being accelerated beyond even NASA's wildest dreams. Everything at NASA went in steps, everything. And here they're going to skip steps and rush to the moon. And people are, a lot of people are coming out against it. There's editorials in major newspapers against it. The most famous astronomer in the world, Bernard Lovell, no relation to Jim, in England, says, accept the fact that the Soviets are going to get there first and don't rush like this.
Sure.
Buzz Aldrin's father, himself an aviation legend, pleads with NASA not to do this mission. And even a person, I reproduce a letter in the book sent by a school teacher from Connecticut who begs NASA, please don't do this in December. This has been the most terrible year any of us has ever lived through. But Christmas, that is that one day that we all just get to exhale, if only for a few hours, and forget this trouble. But if something happens to these men, Christmas will never be the same. We will never look at Christmas again. And of course, the same was true of the moon. When George Low, the mastermind of the Apollo 8 mission, and Chris Kraft, one of the great legends and masterminds of mission control from NASA, presented, and others presented the proposition of sending Apollo 8 suddenly to the moon, James Webb, the head of all NASA, screamed into his phone. He didn't talk. He screamed, "Are you out of your minds?" And he went through the risks as you and I have discussed them today. And then he added that one risk that the NASA managers hadn't thought of. He said, and I quote him, "If anything happens to these 3 brave men at the moon, poets, lovers, no one will ever look at the moon the same again."
Yeah.
And they hadn't thought about that. But of course, as that teacher had pointed out, the same was true of Christmas. Can you imagine if these 3 men died at the moon on Christmas? Mm-hmm. And yet NASA believed in itself and believed in the astronauts and in its vision and its capabilities enough that on December 21st of 1968, they launched the world's most powerful rocket and set course for the moon.
Yeah. It's a very powerful story. One thing I was thrilled about, I was thankful for the internet on this one, is that when you were discussing the TV broadcasts and the Christmas reading and all that kind of stuff, I was like, I'll bet this stuff is on YouTube. I can go watch this right now. And it was all there. And so I was able to read the passage and then go watch the actual footage on YouTube, which I thought was really fascinating and lent a lot of even more depth to the story that was already there to be able to see that.
Yeah.
I imagine you saw all those as well. Yeah.
I did see them, and it was very lucky to have them. And by the way, you can also read the entire transcript of the whole flight, which is online as well. So you have all this documentary evidence, and it reminded me of having Chatterton and Kohler and John Mattera give me these videotapes so that I could actually see and hear for myself what was going on. But yes, you have these seminal moments. You have the astronauts reading on Christmas Eve. They're told that they're going to be making their 3rd live television broadcast, and that broadcast on Christmas Eve, 1968, will be listened to by more people than have ever tuned into a human voice at once in history.
Right.
1/3 of the world's population, and they gave them no more instruction than this: say something appropriate. That's what they told Frank Borman. He loves to tell that story. Even to this day, 50 years later, it makes him laugh every time. I've heard him tell it to me, just to me personally, 4 or 5 times. And he laughs every time. And he says, can you imagine now that you would give 3 astronauts that instruction, say something appropriate? If it happened now, it would go through 14 focus groups and 15 committees, and it would go through the White House and ad agencies, and it would be vetted. He said it just left it to us. And for most of the time before the flight, the astronauts could not think what was appropriate to say to the entire world on Christmas Eve. And I won't go into the whole story. I explain it in the book, but through a really lucky set of circumstances, they get a suggestion by a woman who they'd never met. And and this was top secret, all of this. Even the astronauts' wives had no idea what was going on with these words. But this wonderful woman made a suggestion, and they wrote it down on fireproof paper, put it in the flight plan, never told their wives, didn't tell NASA, nobody but the 3 astronauts. And this woman and her husband really knew what they were going to say. But there they are making this broadcast on Christmas Eve, 1968. They're orbiting the moon. They're showing a third of the world. This is the crater we're passing over, and this is what we've been doing. And then they have a couple minutes left, and they say, now we'd like to deliver a message to the world. And each of them, one by one, starts to read from the first lines from the book of Genesis, in the beginning. And it staggers the people at Mission Control, and tears start streaming down their eyes. But they're not the only ones. Across the world, people are breaking down in tears, because this is a message to all of us. This is a message of unity. It is an origin story. It's about so many of us. And they're not speaking to different factions. They're not speaking to different countries. They're speaking to us all as one. And this is the first time with Apollo 8, human beings have ever seen the Earth as a full sphere.
Yeah.
And this is the first time we've ever looked back on ourselves as a whole. We are the only color in an otherwise pitch black universe. And these 3 men are speaking, and they read from the book of Genesis. And as soon as Borman's done and he wishes everybody, he says, on the good earth, a Merry Christmas, the transmission goes dark. And the reports are that from all over the world, people streamed out of homes, out of schools, taverns, apartments, from under bridges, tears in their eyes, all of them looking skyward, hoping to catch a glimpse of the astronauts in the spacecraft who spoke to all of us as one and at once, knowing full well that they're never going to see the spacecraft, but looking all the same. That's the power and the impact that moment and Apollo 8 had on the world in 1968.
Yeah, what an amazing story. Really fantastic. Well, I'm sure the book is doing very, very well. I'm going to buy a copy of it for my dad for his birthday, in fact. Where is the best place online for people to keep up with what you're doing and your projects?
Oh, I have a website. It's just my name, robertkurson.com. It's Robert, Kurson.com. And that has information about all 4 of my books, and then some of my old magazine stories, one of which you read. I'm grateful for that. And lots of nice other information about Apollo 8 and other cool stuff.
Great. Fantastic. And do you have any idea what your next project is going to be?
Not yet. That is the single hardest challenge of my career, is to find a book that's worthy of the story of Apollo 8.
Sure.
Once you get to tell the story of mankind's first journey ever away from home and to the moon, it better be a pretty good one to follow on. So those kinds of stories they're few and far between, but when you find it, they're worth it. I always think a really good nonfiction story has a kind of power that even really great fiction can't quite deliver.
Yes.
When you read something and you're thinking in the back of your mind, this actually happened. That's an amazing feeling.
Yeah.
If anybody has ideas for me, I'm all ears.
Okay, good. Good to know. Good to know. Well, Robert, thank you so much for taking the time to do this today. I know we've been working on this for a while, but I appreciate you doing it.
Oh, it's a total honor for me. And thank you for being so well prepared and asking such great questions. It's just a real privilege to talk to you.
Oh, I'm glad to hear it. Thanks so much. There it is, friends. That was my interview with Robert Kurson. You can find out more about what he's doing at robertkurson.com. His last name is Kurson. And I got to tell you guys, that was a highlight for me. That was a good one. I've been doing this show 3 years now. And as I appreciate you, and I appreciate all the people that come on to be interviewed on the show. It's just fantastic to be able to talk with all these super talented, creative people. I really, really enjoyed a whole bunch. I think I've mentioned in the past, every time I see somebody that I want to talk to, where I go, I'd love to talk to that person, I have to figure out if they've done anything remotely piratey so that I can have them on the show. And I still have a wish list of people of people to get, but Robert Kurson was definitely on that wish list. So today was a very, very cool episode, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. So again, robertkurson.com is where you can find out more about that. And of course, you can get Rocket Men and Pirate Hunters and his other books there, and Amazon and all the usual places. And again, if you want to find out more about what Rich Manic is doing, you can go to CaptainFestus.com and check out his new video and music and all the stuff they're doing. Did you learn something on today's show? Did you hear something you didn't know before? Did you hear something that you liked? A topic of conversation maybe you wanted to jump in on and make some comments about? Come on over to the Facebook page, facebook.com/underthecrossbones, and leave us a comment comment there there'll be a thread for this episode. And you can check it out, see what other people are saying, and put your 2 cents in. Put your 2 pieces of 8 in the pot. I want to hear them. We are also sponsored today by Pirate Radio of the Treasure Coast, WKKC-DB, playing the best music of today's hits and yesterday's classics. And Pirate Radio Talk, playing the best pirate shows, including Under the Crossbones, 24/7, all commercial free. Awesome. Yeah. To listen, go to pirateradioofthetreasurecoast.com or go pick up the Pirate Radio WKKC-DB app in the App Store, whatever your particular app store is. That's the music stations. For the talk stations, go to pirateradiotc.com or pick up the Pirate Radio Talk app. And, of course, you can even yell at your Alexa device. Hey, Alexa, or hey, Google, play Pirate Radio of the Treasure Coast or play Under the Crossbones, and it will do it. Those are the only things. You can't tell it to play anything else. It won't play. We have made a deal with Google where it'll only play Pirate Radio of the Treasure Coast or Under the Crossbones, and that is absolutely not true. But I'll put it in your head, then you only listen to us. It's all good. All right. We've had a good long show today. Once again, I want to, 3 years into the show, I want to thank you so much for tuning in every week and telling your friends and doing all that kind of good stuff. That is the end of our show for today. Next week, Shanna Franklin of Tea and Strumpets is going to be on the show. And after that, who knows? I have nothing in the can and nothing scheduled yet and so much traveling to do. So it's going to be an adventurous next couple of weeks as I find some guests to bring to you. But as always, they will be super interesting, creative people that you will absolutely love. All right. So again, let's hit those websites one more time. RobertKurson.com and CaptainFestus.com to see what Rich Manic is up to. Go get Rocket Men. I know you're going to enjoy it. It's a great book. And if you haven't read Pirate Hunters yet, go get that as well. All the show notes for this episode are at underthecrossbones.com/154. Thanks again. I'll see you next week.